If you've ever been made to feel like a backup plan in your own family, like some sort of emergency spare tire they keep in the trunk just in case something goes wrong, you'll understand exactly what I'm about to say. My name's Dylan, I'm 28, and I grew up in a family that never saw me as the one. You know how some families have a golden child? Ours did too. My older brother, Seth, could do no wrong, even when he was doing a lot of wrong. I was the younger one, the quiet one, the he'll be fine on his own one. Not out of confidence in me, mind you, more like indifference. From as early as I can remember, I was reminded in subtle and not so subtle ways that I wasn't the family's priority. When I got accepted into college on a full ride, my parents barely reacted. "Well, you always were the bookish one," my dad muttered, flipping through the TV channels. When Seth got into a state school after barely scraping through high school, my mom threw a barbecue. I wish I were exaggerating, but I still went. I still smiled. I still handed him a card with $50 tucked inside, because that's what family does, right? Growing up, I figured maybe things would change with time. That if I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and just waited my turn, I'd finally be acknowledged. But that moment never came. Not when I landed my first job. Not when I published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal. Not even when I bought my first apartment. It was always Seth this, Seth that. When he crashed my dad's car at 22 and blamed the brakes, my parents helped him buy another one. When I offered to pay off a portion of their mortgage once I got promoted, they politely declined, saying, "Save that for your future family. We're doing fine." Except they weren't fine. They just didn't want anything from me. The phrase that stuck with me more than anything else came up at least once a year, usually around holidays or stressful family events. "You're not the one we're relying on, Dylan." My mom said it with a shrug, like it was just a fact. My dad said it with finality. Seth didn't say it at all, but his smirk said plenty. I tried not to let it bother me, but it sunk in deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being treated like I didn't matter. Like I was an extra in my own family's movie. The real shift started about 3 years ago, not long after my grandfather passed away. He and I had been close, closer than I was with anyone else in my family. He was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, and he had this quiet way of making you feel like what you said mattered. I used to visit him every other weekend once I started working full-time. We'd sit on his porch, drinking lukewarm coffee, talking about everything from politics to baseball. He never tried to give me advice unless I asked for it, but when he did speak, it hit home. After one especially rough Christmas where my mom had once again found a way to exclude me from the important family photo, I told Grandpa I was thinking of moving out of state. He just looked at me, smiled, and said, "Sometimes, Dylan, the best thing you can do for people who don't see your worth is to let them see what it looks like when you're gone." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would echo in my head for years. After Grandpa died, the family was, well, different. Not in the sad, grief-stricken way you might expect. My parents went into logistics mode. "He didn't have much," my mom said casually one afternoon. "We'll sell the house, split the savings. I think Seth might move in while it's on the market." I didn't say anything. I hadn't been consulted, hadn't even been told the house was going up for sale. Grandpa's house was where I'd spent some of the best moments of my life, and they were treating it like just another asset on a spreadsheet. I didn't push back. I didn't fight. I just started backing away. It started small, skipping a few family dinners, turning down weekend visits, not replying to group texts right away. I told myself I was just busy with work, but the truth was I was tired. Tired of showing up to a table where there was never a seat for me. I spent the next couple years focusing on building a life I could be proud of. I moved into a new apartment, got a dog, met someone incredible, her name's Alina, and slowly began to carve out a version of adulthood that didn't revolve around my parents' lukewarm approval. Alina was everything I hadn't realized I needed. Patient, sharp-witted, and full of questions about things I never thought anyone would care to ask, like what my favorite chapter of a book was, or whether I preferred foggy mornings to sunny ones. The more I grew with her, the more I realized how stunted I'd been around my own family. With her, I wasn't just tolerated, I was celebrated. She met my parents once at a family birthday dinner for Seth and came away with this weird look on her face. Later, she asked, "Is it always like that?" I knew what she meant. I just nodded. Fast forward to now. I'm getting married in 2 weeks. It's going to be a small ceremony, intimate, personal, ours. We're not doing the whole 300-guest circus. Just the people who've actually been there for us. My best man is a friend I've known since college. Alina's maid of honor is her sister. It's been peaceful, joyful, until about 5 days ago. That's when the phone call started. At first, it was one missed call from my mom. Then two. Then a voicemail that said, "Call us back. It's important." I didn't. I figured it was probably about the wedding. Maybe them wanting to argue over seating or suggest we invite some obscure second cousin we hadn't spoken to in a decade. Then came the texts. "Dylan, we need to talk. It's about Grandpa. Seth is very upset. Please call." I ignored them at first, but then Alina got a message on her phone from my aunt. That was the moment I knew something was up. She barely knows Alina, and the message was weirdly formal. "I understand you're marrying Dylan in a few weeks. It would mean a lot to the family if things were reconciled before then. We need to be close again." That phrase, it hit me like a brick. We need to be close again. Again? When had we ever been close? I finally called back. I needed to know what this sudden interest was about. My mom answered on the first ring, like she'd been staring at her phone. Her voice was all sugar and concern. "Dylan, oh honey, thank you for calling. I know we've had our differences, but family is family, right?" I said nothing. She went on, stumbling through a half-hearted apology before finally getting to the point. "We had a meeting with Grandpa's lawyer. Apparently, there's some confusion about the estate. He left everything to you." I swear, time stopped. My stomach dropped, and all I could do was whisper, "What?" Her voice tightened. "The house, the savings, his investments, all of it. You're the sole beneficiary." Now here's the thing. I hadn't known that. I hadn't even asked about the will. I assumed, like always, that I wouldn't be considered. That whatever little there was would go to Seth, or maybe be split up quietly. But now, apparently, the truth had come out. And suddenly, the son who wasn't the one they were relying on was their only shot at a legacy. And just like that, they wanted to be close again. I didn't say much during that call, just that I'd need time to process. But the moment I hung up, the messages doubled. My dad called. Seth called, twice. My aunt. Even my cousin, who I haven't seen in years, sent a Facebook message. Everyone suddenly wanted to reconnect, to talk things through, and I haven't replied to a single one. I didn't sleep the night after that phone call. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling while Alina dozed beside me, breathing softly. I had her hand in mine, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, stuck on a loop of voices that weren't in the room. My mom's fake warmth, my dad's cold silence, and Seth's voice that I hadn't even heard yet, but already knew would be laced with entitlement. The calls kept coming. The texts multiplied. I muted the group chat, but they started messaging me individually, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, like this was a business deal and not a twisted reckoning years in the making. It had only been a day since they found out Grandpa left everything to me. And somehow, in 24 hours, I had gone from the overlooked son to the center of their universe. The next morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. Not just any knock, the kind you recognize immediately. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more. My mom. She used to do the same knock when I was a kid, and she forgot her keys. I froze. I hadn't told them where I lived. They must have gotten it from my cousin, or worse, from some online search. Alina stirred, rubbing her eyes. I kissed her forehead and told her to stay in the bedroom. When I opened the door, my mom was standing there, purse over her shoulder, wearing her concerned mother expression, the one she used at parent-teacher conferences when Seth had gotten into trouble. She looked at me like I owed her something. "Dylan," she said, like it was a blessing to see me. "Can we talk?" I didn't let her in. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She blinked. "You're not going to let your mother in." "You're not here to see me," I said flatly. "You're here for Grandpa's money." Her lips thinned, and I saw the cracks in her mask. "Don't be dramatic." I didn't respond. She sighed and adjusted the strap of her purse. "Look, I know things haven't always been easy, but we're still your family. And Seth, he's going through a rough time." There it was. The pivot. The soft guilt trip wrapped in a plea. It was always about Seth. Always. "He just found out he's not getting anything," she continued. "He's devastated. You know how close he was with Dad." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Close. He never visited. Grandpa told me once he hadn't heard from Seth in months. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "He's been busy." "We're all busy," I snapped. But I still made time. I sat on the porch with him. I drove him to his appointments. I helped him fix the front steps last spring. Where was Seth then? Her face hardened. You don't understand. Seth has responsibilities. A child. A family to support. I nodded slowly. And I don't. Got it. Dylan. She began, but I cut her off. No. For years, I've been told not to expect anything. That I wasn't the one you were relying on. You said it so many times I started to believe it. So I backed off. I lived my life. Now suddenly I'm useful again, and you're at my door? Her expression turned sharp. That money was supposed to go to the family. Not just you. Your grandfather must have been confused. He wasn't well in the end. I stared at her. That was the moment something in me snapped. He was perfectly well. You just never visited long enough to notice. She flinched, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Without another word, she turned and walked off. No apology. No emotion. Just a tight jaw and stiff shoulders. I went back inside, hands shaking, heart pounding. Alina met me with a mug of tea and didn't ask any questions. She didn't have to. I told her everything. The next few days were a blur of escalating weirdness. My dad showed up at my office building but didn't come inside. Just waited in the parking lot until I walked out and gave me this fatherly, distant, "Let's go grab a drink," like nothing had happened. When I said no, he nodded like he expected it, like he had some plan in place for rejection. Then Seth called. No voicemail. Just a missed call. Then another. Then a third. Eventually, I picked up. He didn't even say hello. You think you're better than us now? That was the first thing out of his mouth. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly, I replied. He scoffed. You don't deserve that money, Dylan. You know that. You didn't do anything for it. I paused. I was there for Grandpa. You weren't. I had a life. A job. A kid. So did I shot back. You just didn't make room for him. Silence. Then, low and bitter. You're a selfish prick, you know that? You're going to let your niece grow up without a college fund just so you can what? Buy a better car? Get a bigger apartment? That's not what Grandpa would have wanted. And that's when it really hit me. They weren't upset because they felt hurt. They were upset because I wasn't giving in. They weren't mourning Grandpa's death. They were mourning the money they thought was theirs. That night, I got a call from the lawyer. He sounded tired. Dylan, he said, I've been getting calls. From your family. A lot of them. Yeah, I said. They found out. They're contesting the will. I closed my eyes. Of course they were. They're claiming undue influence, he continued. That your grandfather wasn't of sound mind. That he was pressured. They're trying to get it frozen. I felt the heat rise in my chest. That's not true. He knew exactly what he was doing. I believe you, he said. But they're going to fight this. Hard. It wasn't even about the money. It was about control. It was about never letting me be the one in power. And now that I had something they couldn't touch, they were clawing at it like wolves. I told Alina everything again. We were 2 weeks from the wedding. 2 weeks from what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And suddenly I was dealing with legal threats from my own family. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened the following Sunday. We'd planned a small pre-wedding brunch. Nothing big, just a few friends, Alina's parents, and some out-of-town guests who'd flown in early. We rented out a quiet space at a cafe downtown. I didn't even tell my family about it. And yet, halfway through the brunch, as we were all laughing and sipping mimosas, the door opened, and in walked Seth. Alina froze mid-laugh. My best friend's jaw dropped. Seth was holding something in his hand. A manila folder. He walked straight up to our table and dropped it in front of me. It made a loud thud, and the entire cafe went silent. What is this? I asked. He looked around the table with a smug smile, then back at me. Legal notice. We're officially challenging the will. You'll be hearing from our attorney. Alina stood up. You need to leave. But he ignored her. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Don't forget who carried this family when you were still hiding in Grandpa's shadow. You were never the one, Dylan. Never. Then he turned and walked out. The cafe was silent for a few seconds, and then the conversations awkwardly resumed. But something had broken. Not just the peace of the event, but something inside me. Because that wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war. I didn't go home right after the brunch. I just walked. No destination in mind. I wandered aimlessly through streets I'd driven 100 times, but barely noticed on foot. Alina had offered to come with me, but I told her I needed a minute. Truth was, I didn't want her to see me like this, cracked open and spiraling, because I'd worked so hard to build a version of myself that didn't need their approval anymore. But when Seth dropped that envelope in front of me, in front of our guests, in front of her, it wasn't just an ambush. It was a reminder that I was still vulnerable to them, that even after years of distance, they could still find a way to break something inside me. By the time I made it back to our apartment, the sun was going down and my feet hurt from hours of walking. Alina was sitting on the couch, laptop in front of her, our dog curled up at her side. She looked up, her eyes scanning me like she wasn't sure whether to speak or just hold me. I sat down next to her and let the silence sit between us. Then I said, quietly, "I think they're going to win." She frowned. "The lawsuit?" I nodded. "They have more resources, more people backing them. They'll drag it out until I give in." Alina closed her laptop slowly. "Is that what you want to do?" "No," I said, "but it might be the only option." She didn't say anything right away. She just reached over and took my hand. "Then let them drag. You're not who you used to be, Dylan. You don't have to fight like the old you." That stuck with me, because the old me, the one I had been for so long, he would have given up already. He would have seen the writing on the wall, apologized for causing a fuss, and walked away with his hands up, saying it wasn't worth it. But the person I had become over these last few years, the one Alina had helped me grow into, wasn't built like that anymore. Not entirely. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me. That week was a blur of emails from lawyers, wedding arrangements, and cold silence from every member of my family. They'd circled their wagons. I was the outsider now, and somehow, they'd made it look like I was the one causing problems. That I'd tricked Grandpa into changing the will. That I'd used his loneliness to my advantage. My aunt even posted a vague Facebook status. "It's disgusting what some people will do for money. Grandpa deserved better." It got 30 comments and 100 likes. All from people I once sat next to at family cookouts. I stopped logging into social media after that. I started losing sleep. My appetite faded. I kept trying to focus on the wedding, on the good, on the future, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Seth's smug face, or my mom's cold shoulder, or my dad standing outside my work like a ghost from a life I thought I'd buried. And the worst part? I started to believe them. I'd replay conversations with Grandpa in my head, trying to convince myself I hadn't misread his intentions, that he had wanted me to have everything, that he hadn't been confused or manipulated. But doubt crept in. That poisonous voice. What if you imagined your bond was stronger than it was? What if you're exactly who they say you are, just lucky, not deserving? One night, 5 days before the wedding, I sat alone in our guest room, door closed, laptop open, reading through the legal documents I hadn't had the stomach to touch since they were delivered. There it was in black and white. Mr. Edwin Langford bequeaths the entirety of his estate, including property, savings, and investments, to his grandson, Dylan Langford, with no contest, in recognition of his unwavering presence and care in his final years. I read it 3 times. Unwavering presence. That was the moment something shifted. Because that line, that wasn't lawyer speak. That was Grandpa's voice. That was him. I remembered him saying something similar once, on that porch, during one of our last afternoons together. I'd asked if he ever regretted not having more kids. He'd laughed and said, "Why? I've got you. You never let me go long without a visit. That's what counts, Dylan." Showing up. I closed the laptop, walked out of the guest room, and I didn't go back in. Instead, the next morning, I took the day off. Alina didn't even ask where I was going. She just kissed my cheek and handed me a granola bar. I drove to Grandpa's house. The property was still in limbo due to the legal challenge, but I had keys. I stepped inside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The house smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but it still felt like home, like safety. I walked from room to room, touching old picture frames, flipping through familiar books, running my fingers along the worn armrest of his reading chair. And in the back closet of his bedroom, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a box marked Dylan. Inside were photos, letters, even printouts of articles I'd written for my college newspaper. A few framed awards I'd forgotten existed. At the bottom was a journal. His handwriting was unmistakable. I didn't read the whole thing. Just one entry. From a year before he passed. "Dylan came by again today. I told him about my knee giving me trouble, and he offered to fix the back steps. I said no, but he showed up next weekend with tools anyway. That's who he is. Always does the work, even when no one asks. I think he sees how little his efforts are noticed. But I notice. Every time. That was all I needed. I walked out of that house with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Conviction. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just a quiet certainty that I wasn't wrong. And if I wasn't wrong, I wasn't going to act like I was. So I changed gears. Instead of hiding, I got proactive. I found a better attorney. One that didn't just handle estate challenges, but specialized in defending small heirs against larger families trying to squeeze them out. She was direct, calm, and methodical. She looked at the documents, then looked at me and said, "We'll win. It'll be a headache, but we'll win." Next, I started preparing for the wedding again. With joy. Not the fake smile I'd been wearing, but the kind that came from knowing I'd earned this moment. Alina noticed the difference immediately. I started sleeping better. I started laughing again. The dark cloud that had been hovering over me began to thin. I even called my best man and told him, "The speech? Make it funny. No pity party." He laughed and said, "That's the Dylan I know." And somewhere in there, between cake tastings and venue walkthroughs, I realized something kind of earth-shaking. For the first time in my life, I didn't need my family's approval. Not a shred of it. Not their attendance, their compliments, or their blessing. Because I had built a life without them. And that life was good. It didn't make their betrayal hurt any less. But it made it survivable. And maybe that's all I needed. Then, 3 days before the wedding, I got an email. No subject line. Just a scanned document. It was from my cousin Amelia. One of the only family members who hadn't taken a side. In fact, I hadn't heard from her at all during the chaos. But the document she sent? It was a copy of a notarized letter Grandpa had written 6 months before he passed. Not a legal will. Just a personal letter. But it had weight. Real weight. It said, in his own words, that he had chosen to leave everything to me because I had been there. Because I had earned it. He said Seth had made his choices and that his parents had enabled too much for too long. It was raw, emotional, and utterly damning to their case. At the bottom, Grandpa had written, "Dylan doesn't need this money. That's why I want him to have it." That single line undid every doubt I had left. But I didn't respond to Amelia. Not yet. I didn't tell anyone right away, not even Alina, what I planned to do. Because this wasn't going to be the kind of revenge you shout about. No big confrontation. No viral Facebook post. No screaming match in a courtroom. No, this was going to be quiet. Surgical. The kind of revenge that didn't just hurt feelings, it shifted power. I didn't want to burn them to the ground. I wanted them to live in the house they built. I just planned to change who owned the keys. After reading that letter from Grandpa, the one Amelia had sent me, I sat in the kitchen until well past midnight, turning it over in my hands like a loaded weapon. I could already see how powerful it would be in court. No, it wasn't part of the will. But it was handwritten, notarized, dated. It made his intent undeniably clear. And it shattered their entire narrative. But more importantly, it reminded me of who I was. Not just who I had become, but who I had always been. The one who showed up. The one who listened. The one who never expected anything, but still gave everything. That's when the idea came to me. Not in a blaze of fury, but like a slow unfurling. A setup that would take precision, patience, and just the right timing. And the timing? That would be the wedding. They were still invited. At least on paper. We'd sent them invites months before the will drama began. Alina had wanted to retract them after the brunch ambush, but I asked her not to. "Let them come," I said. "Let them see." Because this wasn't just a ceremony anymore. It was a turning point, and I wanted them front row when everything shifted. So, I started laying the groundwork. First, I called Amelia. It took her a second to answer. Her voice was cautious, probably bracing herself for backlash. But when she heard my tone, she relaxed. I thanked her for the letter. Then I asked her, point blank, "Why'd you send it?" She paused. "Because I was tired of watching everyone pretend like you were never there. You were the only one who showed up for Grandpa. And I know he was proud of you, Dylan. That letter, it was meant for you. I just figured you needed it now." I asked if she'd be willing to speak with my lawyer. To confirm she'd found the letter, knew it was real, had seen Grandpa sign it. She agreed without hesitation. "Also," I said, "I might need a little help at the wedding." There was a beat. Then she laughed. "Are you planning something?" I smiled. "Let's just say, I want them to feel what I've felt. But cleaner." She was in. Over the next few days, I started weaving the rest of the plan together. I met with my lawyer again, this time armed with the letter. She read it slowly, twice, then looked up at me with this gleam in her eye. "This changes everything." We'll still fight it in court, I said. But I want to do something first. Something personal. She raised an eyebrow. Legal. I grinned. Barely. Next, I started digging. Quietly. Strategically. You see, for years I'd stayed out of my family's business. But now, I had access. With Grandpa's estate technically in my name, pinning the legal battle, I'd been given access to his bank accounts, his safe deposit box, even his archived emails. And that's when things got interesting. I wasn't looking for leverage, but I found it. Emails from my mom to Grandpa, months before he passed. Cold. Transactional. Asking for money. Offering to take Seth off his hands for a few weekends in exchange for a little help with the mortgage. The language made my skin crawl. Even worse. One message where she offered to sell some of Grandpa's old collectibles through a friend and never mentioned him again after that. I cross-referenced the dates. Sure enough, a few weeks later, rare items from Grandpa's World War II memorabilia collection had disappeared from the inventory list he kept. He'd even written, in his own notes, loaned bayonet to Sandra for appraisal, never returned. Sandra, my mother. I saved screenshots, PDFs, backed them up to a drive I kept off-site. Then I found Seth's trail. Bank transfers. Small amounts, but regular. Payments Grandpa had made to cover Seth's car repairs, legal fees, even a bounced rent check. All while Seth told everyone he hadn't seen the old man in ages. Again, screenshots. Records. Dated and clean. And with every piece of evidence, I wasn't thinking how do I destroy them? I was thinking, how do I reveal the truth? In front of everyone? The wedding was now 4 days away. Everything was falling into place. Amelia had agreed to speak during the reception. She would tell a short story about Grandpa. Something warm, honest. But she'd include one particular detail. That Grandpa had personally told her I was the one he trusted most. That he'd changed his will because he wanted someone who truly cared for him to inherit. Not someone who only remembered his birthday when money was tight. She wouldn't name names. She didn't have to. I asked my best man to tweak his speech. I didn't give him details, just said, lean into the whole, rising from the shadows theme. Talk about growth. About what it means to find your place when you're always told you don't have one. He nodded. Can I make fun of your haircut in middle school too? Absolutely. 2 days before the wedding, Seth called again. I let it go to voicemail. His message? Look, man. I get it. You're mad. But this doesn't have to be ugly. We can work something out. Split the estate 50-50. That's fair, right? You don't need all of it. I saved the message. Then, later that night, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my dad. His voice was slow, measured, almost like he was talking to a customer. Dylan, your mother's very upset. This whole situation is hurting the family. I know you're angry, but dragging this into court, it's unnecessary. Let's settle this quietly. We'll withdraw the challenge. You just agree to distribute a portion of the estate among everyone. Keep the house, if that's important to you. But the money, it's more than you need. I didn't respond. He continued. You're getting married. You should be focused on your future, not the past. Be reasonable, son. That word, son. I don't think he'd called me that in years. I ended the call. No words. No explanation. Just silence. Because sometimes, the best setup isn't dramatic. It's cold. It's quiet. It's slow. It's letting them climb up a ladder they don't realize is missing the top rung. Then, the night before the wedding, I did one last thing. I went back to Grandpa's house. Alina came with me this time. We stood in the living room, holding hands, surrounded by dust and memories. I showed her the letter, the emails, the records. She listened, eyes wide, lips pressed into a hard line. And when I was done, she asked, "Are you ready?" I nodded. Then she asked the more important question. "Are you sure this is the kind of closure you want?" And I surprised myself with the answer. Yes, because I'm not doing this to punish them. I'm doing it to free myself. She smiled. Then let's do it. And we walked out, locked the door, and stepped into the night. Two people who had been underestimated their whole lives, about to show a room full of people exactly who they had become. The morning of our wedding arrived like a scene from a dream. One of those calm, clear mornings where the light is golden and everything feels suspended, like the day itself is holding its breath. I woke up before the alarm. Not nervous, not jittery, just ready. Alina was still asleep, her hand curled under her cheek, breathing slow and steady. She looked so peaceful I didn't dare wake her. So I sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, pulled out my phone, and played the voicemail Seth had left again. You don't need all of it. I stared at the screen. He still didn't get it. They never got it. It had never been about the money. We arrived at the venue around noon. It was tucked away on a private estate outside the city, surrounded by hills and tall pines. Alina had picked it because it reminded her of the hiking trail where we'd had our first real conversation, the one where I finally let someone in without fear of judgment. The staff was already bustling, tables being set, flowers adjusted, someone checking the sound system. My best man handed me a coffee and gave me a grin. You good? I nodded. I'm good. You sure? He leaned in. Because you look like a man about to pull off a heist. I smiled. Not a heist. A reckoning. By 3 p.m., the ceremony began. It was short, sweet, and exactly what we wanted. When Alina walked down the aisle, everything else faded. Every betrayal, every slight, every cold holiday dinner where I'd been shoved into the background. All of it dissolved under the warmth in her eyes. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We kissed. And then the real show began. The reception was held in a glass-paneled banquet room overlooking the valley. Everything was intentional, light, open, and impossible to hide in. There were about 60 guests. Every table was labeled with a location meaningful to us: Grandpa's porch, the college cafeteria, the bookstore where we met. Our table? The life we built. I spotted them before I even sat down, my parents and Seth. They were seated at the very back, right by the catering prep area, at the only table labeled family. I told the wedding coordinator to put them there, not out of pettiness, but as a visual cue. This is where they belonged now, at the fringe of a life they thought they could control. They looked wildly uncomfortable. My mother was wearing a tight smile like it had been stapled to her face. My dad kept fiddling with his napkin. Seth was already 2 drinks in, judging by the way he was slouched in his chair. The first hour passed like any other reception: photos, appetizers, laughter echoing off glass. Then came the speeches. First up, my best man. He knocked it out of the park. Funny, heartfelt, just the right amount of roasting. He told a story about how I once tried to fix a leaky faucet in our dorm and ended up flooding the hallway. People laughed. I laughed. Even Alina wiped a tear from her cheek. Then came Amelia. She walked up, heels steady, eyes calm. She looked like a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to say. She didn't even glance at the family table. I didn't think I'd be speaking today, she began, her voice strong. But Dylan asked me to share something. Not because I'm family, but because I was one of the few people who witnessed what family should look like. She paused, scanning the room. Some of you knew Dylan's grandfather, Edwin. To the outside world, he was quiet, reserved. But to those who truly knew him, he was generous, intentional, and observant. He noticed the little things. He valued character over charisma, presence over promises. Another pause. In his final years, I watched Dylan show up for him, week after week. Not because he expected anything, but because that's who he is. And Edwin noticed. I know, because I found a letter Edwin wrote 6 months before he passed. A letter that said, in his own words, Dylan doesn't need this money. That's why I want him to have it. Gasps scattered through the room. My mother shifted in her chair. My father's face tightened. Seth set down his drink with a clink. Amelia continued. There's been a lot of noise lately. Lawsuits, accusations, demands. But I think the truth is simpler than all of that. Edwin made a choice, and Dylan honored it. She raised her glass. To Dylan and Alina. May your life be full of people who see you, who show up, and who never make you feel like a spare part in your own story. Applause. Thunderous. And from the back table, silence. I didn't look at them. I didn't have to. After dinner, while the first dance played, I excused myself for a moment. I knew it was time for the next part of the plan. I walked to the side room where the wedding coordinator had set up a projector for us to display a photo montage. Only this time, it would begin with something else. Something quiet. I gave a nod to the technician, and the slideshow began. The first slide, a photo of Grandpa on his porch, smiling, holding a coffee cup. Then, his letter, displayed in full. His handwriting. His signature. The line that shattered all doubts. Dylan doesn't need this money. That's why I want him to have it. The room went still. You could hear forks stop clinking. Then came a photo of Grandpa and me rebuilding his front steps. Another of me reading to him while he dozed. A timeline of years, not dollars. I turned to see my parents staring, stunned. My mom's face had gone pale. My dad's arms were crossed tight, as if holding himself together. Seth just looked hollow. That's when I stepped up to the mic. I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I didn't want this day to be about the past. But sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried. I looked around the room, then directly at the family table. For those wondering why things have been tense lately, why people who once called themselves family are seated at the very edge of this celebration, it's because truth has a way of burning through silence. I held up a small flash drive. Contained in this drive are bank statements, emails, and personal records that show a long pattern of manipulation, entitlement, and quiet theft. My mother once borrowed collectibles from Grandpa and never returned them. Seth took money while mocking him behind his back. They only visited when they wanted something. A quiet murmur rolled through the crowd. I went on, calm but unflinching. They've claimed I manipulated a dying man, that I'm not the rightful heir. But I was the one who held his hand in the hospital. I was the one who found his favorite records when he forgot where he put them. I was the one who showed up. I turned toward Alina and smiled. I was raised in a house where being unseen became the norm, where love was conditional and praise was rationed. But today, I'm surrounded by people who chose to see me. And that's real family. I placed the flash drive on a table beside me. If anyone here wants to see the full truth, it's here. I won't hide it. I don't need to. Then I walked away from the mic. Later that night, the fallout began. My mother tried to corner me near the restrooms. Her eyes were bloodshot, voice shrill. You humiliated us. I looked her in the eyes. No, you did that to yourself. Seth tried to act unfazed. None of that changes what's going to happen in court. You're right, I said. But the judge will see the letter, the statements, the emails, and so will the public if it comes to that. He sneered. You think people care? No, I said, leaning in. But you do. That was the last time we spoke. The court ruled in my favor 3 weeks later. The letter, combined with Amelia's testimony and the financial records, dismantled their claim of undue influence. The judge called their challenge unsubstantiated and retaliatory. They didn't just lose. They were reprimanded. And because I had offered to settle fairly before the hearing, because I had offered a path out and they spat in my face, the court ordered them to pay all legal fees. Every last dime. Seth had to sell his car. My parents refinanced their house. They tried to frame it as my betrayal, said I'd turned my back on blood. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not even satisfied, really. Just free. I renovated Grandpa's house and turned it into a community reading center. The front porch is still there. I sit on it some weekends with a cup of coffee, watching kids ride their bikes past the hedges he used to trim by hand. Sometimes I think about what he would have said. Probably nothing. Just that quiet smile. Like he knew. As for Alina and me, we moved forward. Together. With nothing left to prove. Because when you spend your whole life being told, you're not the one we're relying on, and then finally realize that you never needed them to rely on you in the first place. That's not revenge. That's liberation. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten son. I felt like the man Grandpa always knew I could become. The one who finally chose himself.